Hey, Earthlings, welcome to 2000 and whatever it is, 2024. So,
You lose track because the years go so fast. I forget what year it is.
indeed, well, yeah, nobody's told us. It just said Happy Vegan New Year. So, Happy Vegan New Year, Linda and Deb and everyone else who is joining. Yeah, so we survived another Christmas, Ronnie.
Yes, we did. I mean, I survived eating about 5 Christmas dinners. I think I ate.
Yeah, I was gonna raise that actually because the fact is,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, your feat of surviving is greater than mine because you had so much food.
Well, yes. I mean, we just went to different places, and there was a Christmas dinner, and I had about 3 at home because all the vegan Christmassy stuff lasted for a few days, so I ended up having like 3. I ended up having a couple of Christmas dinners at home, 2 at a fundraiser we went to, which was a Christmas dinner fundraiser, and then one. I had one at Camp Beagle. We went to visit Louise and I went to visit Camp Beagle on Boxing Day, and they'd been donated a load of Christmas dinners, more Christmas dinners than what there was people there. So I had a Christmas dinner there as well. So
Very
I
good.
was Christmas dinnered right up.
So is it true that about 30 minutes before you get anywhere, Louise rings up and goes, "Ronnie Lee is 30 minutes away. Put the kettle on. Put the put the oven on.
Put the dinner on for him for when he arrives."
Otherwise, he ain't coming.
Yeah.
That's like your rider, like all these stars of these weird riders, don't they, and everything. Hi, Philip. Welcome along. Vegan Pundit and Jennifer. Hello there, everyone. Right, everybody knows the routine, but we'll go through it as we normally do, in the sense that if you want to see the chat in particular, and you're on something like Facebook, then you're not going to be able to do it. So the best thing to do is transfer to my YouTube channel. If you do post on Facebook, we can see your post. It's just that you won't be able to see if anybody in the chat replies to it, that kind of thing. And in terms of posts generally, feel free to comment. We don't charge anybody to put anything up on the screen. So that's a little bit of that's the first 2024 housekeeping done there, Ronnie.
Yes, very good.
All right. Well, there's some great news already. Look at that.
Yeah, that is.
We had COVID for Christmas.
That's not great. I remember all going back about 8-9 years ago. I had flu at Christmas, and that wasn't great. But we all had COVID about 6 weeks ago. So we kind of thankfully had it and got over it in good time for Christmas. But it's.
Do you kind of regularly test yourself, Ronnie? Because I don't.
No, I kind of used to when it was like the the real height of the COVID and that, and when it kind of seemed to be a lot more serious then, and when the tests were free, then I used to do it regularly. But I did it this time because we'd been to a friend's 50th birthday do, and then a few days later everyone seemed to be coming down with COVID, and I started feeling not very well. So that's why I did a test, and the first time it was negative, but then the following morning it was positive.
Well, I'm sure the conspiracy theories will have something to say about that. Right. Anyway, in relation to what we talk about, we're going to talk about something new, but related to what we've already talked about, because we did a show a few weeks ago now, isn't it, about burnout. And so this is a kind of related subject, which we've kind of called dropout, maybe, but also, and it's interesting. You've used the phrase surrender, which I think might be a little bit unkind. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think they're surrendering?
Well, in terms of like the animal liberation struggle, in terms of it's a struggle, a battle, if you like, to free other animals from human tyranny. And when I use the term surrender, I think that is when people when people adopt the attitude that it's a battle that can't be won, that it's a struggle that can't be won, and so they've sort of given up on the struggle. They've given up fighting, which to me is like is similar to surrender.
It's the equivalent of AWOL, absent without leave, I suppose, for you, is it?
Well, it's not that people always, in all cases, cease to do things to help other animals. It's just that they're no longer campaigning for animal liberation in terms of a widespread concept. Then they no longer believe it's possible for us to have a world where we have widespread animal liberation, where animals everywhere are freed from human tyranny.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to come on to that. Just let me ask you the general question then. Burnout and dropout. To what extent are they the same? Are they the same, or are they different?
Well, I think burnout is is one of the ways in which people drop out. And we did a show a while back. We talked about burnout and ways of preventing it, ways of dealing with it. I mean, burnout is really when someone maybe throws their all into the struggle, and it kind of becomes too much for them, and so they're kind of their energy gets used up. That maybe both their psychological energy and their physical energy, and it often comes with disappointment, because I think some people have the attitude when they're kind of when they're new to the struggle, that if they throw themselves wholeheartedly into it, they'll see some very quick results. And of course that inevitably doesn't happen, because this is we're involved in a marathon rather than a sprint, and change doesn't come very quickly. And you get people thinking that they can change things quickly, then they don't, then they get disheartened, and then they kind of they'll sort of drop out. So in a sense you could probably say that's a kind of perhaps a form of surrender as well, but it's kind of, it's something that comes with a kind of where these people actually get like really kind of emotionally affected by it. They get sort of tired out through having very quickly kind of used up all their energy, so to speak. So but I think what we're talking about today is a lot broader than that. And there's Jazz. Come on.
Hey,
come here. You're doing disrupting.
We got a new panelist.
Don't show your bum to the camera. Come here. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. I've got to sharpen my pencil.
Yes, I know. I don't think she'd appreciate that. Come here.
No.
You're blocking the screen. You are. She's got aches and pains, so I can't really. It's difficult with her to kind of physically grab her and move her, because she's got a health condition where she's kind of.
All right. Ronnie's been booted by a cat. It would appear. Actually, I was going to put up a couple of things, so I'll have a talk about this while Ronnie's coming back. Hopefully, coming back. On the assumption that he's still alive, I just think that his camera's being cut off or something. So yeah, Deb, it's interesting because whether people have kind of dropped out or burnt out, there's then that kind of movement issue about whether they're going to say anything negative, and also I think the reason why they do. And I wonder sometimes whether it might be that they're a little bit ashamed that they have, and so they have to come up with a reason. Whereas I think people who are just more honest will just say, "Look, I just can't take it anymore." That kind of thing. So I think there's some fairly complicated things going on there. Well, we've got Ronnie Lee back.
I think Jazz must have pressed the wrong button. I've now managed to coax her off the computer keypad.
Yeah, there probably isn't a right button for her to press, to be honest.
No, I don't think. Well, I've had one of my previous computer was destroyed by cats in various ways.
All right. Was one of them in liquid form? Was that?
Well, one bit through a cable and it fused the USB, and it caused the USB ports to fuse, and they never worked anymore. And then another one, I was drinking a cup of tea, and another one, this was a while later, another cat knocked my cup, and the tea went on the keyboard, and then I couldn't use the keyboard anymore.
Oh, so it was your fault for not being agile enough to get out of the way.
My fault for drinking tea with the cat.
Yeah, I suppose it would be.
Yes.
Yeah. Paul's saying that would be a rights violation. I think that's a reference to my pencil. I think.
Yes. No, don't do that again. No.
So, what do you think about Debbie's point here that people who drop out, who burn out, but then they also seem to have to go and say stuff then, about the reason or
yes, I think they say, why are you bothering? It's a hopeless task, and yes, I think they do tend to spread it to other people.
I think also people tend to make health claims, don't they? Which are, it's obviously difficult to know whether they're unfounded or not. Half the health claims that you see, especially on a place like TikTok, they don't sound very genuine, to be honest. But of course, there's no way that you can know.
I think that there are people that make health claims as an excuse for not being vegan. But if we're talking about activism, I think people do make health claims as a reason for not.
Well, Cosmic Skeptic use that as a reason to stop being a vegan, right?
Yes.
To the extent that he was a vegan.
They kind of do, but if it's to do with if it's to do with nutrition, have these people actually gone to see a vegan nutritionist, or have they just gone to see an ordinary doctor, where most of them are biased against veganism, or certainly biased against the vegan diet anyway? Yeah, that's the thing. I'd advise them to go and see the nutritionist actually sympathetic to veganism.
Yeah. Okay. And Jennifer came up with this idea, which I wanted to talk about, but we can deal with it now before it goes. But I think there was something in this, in the sense that, put it this way, two separate things. I knew somebody way back who was really, really involved with the campaign I was doing, Waterloo Cup stuff, sabbing, got arrested several times, very kind of active in the local group, Sea Shepherd stuff, all that, right? And then I think that realization of this is the long haul type thing kicked in. And I think that they kind of said without saying, I don't actually, now that I realize I need to give my life to this, I don't actually want to do that. So I think there's that aspect. And then Jennifer's thing, the more modern day thing, which is the social media thing, which is dealing with the trolls and the abuse and the negativity.
You see, what I would say is that there are lots of different ways of campaigning for veganism and animal liberation, and it's quite easy to choose a way where you don't have to deal with trolls. If you don't want to have to deal with trolls, you kind of don't. You don't need to enter into it. I mean, things like door dropping, where you're delivering leaflets to people's homes, or maybe going around leaving leaflets in public places and stuff like that. You don't have to deal with trolls if you do that kind of thing. It's only on social media, and it's only if you kind of, I haven't got time to deal with trolls on social media. So what I do is, all my social media is locked down. I don't allow comments on anything that I post, and it's simply because I don't have time to deal with any trolls or indeed really to respond to anyone who.
But Ronnie, how does that fit with InReach? Because you're a big fan of InReach, right? So...
Well, I think that I tend to do InReach like we're doing now. A lot of our shows are really InReach. I mean, our audience is pretty much exclusively other vegans. We know that. We're certainly on kind of Facebook and probably on YouTube. We are involved in, we do stuff on TikTok as well, and on TikTok you do get non-vegans much more. But our audience for this show, it tends to be exclusively vegan, and so what we tend to be talking about on this show is really aimed at vegans, and that is where we kind of do inreach. We're explaining to people, what veganism really means, and encouraging people to become, to do outreach and to become active, and that kind of thing. So I see this. I kind of see this as a form of inreach, and I think you can still do. I think you can still do inreach just through. Just for a post, if people, even if people can't comment on the post, they can still read or listen to what's in the post, so that can still work. So I kind of, you don't have to deal with trolls if you don't want to. You can lock them out. I mean, I can understand, if people want to deal with them and try and, talk to them rationally and perhaps win a few of them round, then I think it's great if people want to do that. It's just that, that's not something I want to do personally. And
well, funny enough, though, I was shown an old Facebook memory, I think, today, of someone who was a butcher who had come around to veganism because of watching TikTok live shows.
Oh yes. I mean, yeah, there have been people. There have been people in the past who've been butchers, and there have been people in the past who've been animal farmers who have become vegan. That can happen.
I mean, we've got one at the moment. So there's a pig farmer, so called, in North America, but he wants to move out of it and move to a plant-based system. He wants to, if he got the money for the 3 pigs who are in his farm now, he would make a sanctuary for them rather than send them off, this kind of stuff. So I mean, whether all this is true is got we've got to find out. But certainly there are, these shifts are happening.
Those things do happen, and we have to leave the door open for them to happen. But people like that aren't kind of really trolls, are they?
Well, they might start off as trolls.
They might start off being trolls. Yeah, I mean, so I know of people who started off being trolls and now they're vegan. And that can happen. So I'm not not at all opposed to people engaging with trolls. It's just that it's just a thing that I kind of don't have time to do personally.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, absolutely. And I mean, like, going back to the troll thing, it's interesting because that does raise questions about moderation of these kind of chats. Because if you're too quick to throw them out, they never get a chance to change. So that's another kind of issue.
I think we're all different in terms of our characters and personalities, and so different forms of outreach will appeal to different people. And I think it's a question of finding it's not a question of giving up on outreach. It's a question of finding a form of outreach which actually suits you in terms of what you feel comfortable with. But there's, I would say, pretty much for all vegans, there'll be a form of outreach that they can do and that they do feel comfortable with.
Yeah, well, I think that's a crucial thing. There's no point in being out of your comfort zone in activism, because that is just you're kind of asking for trouble there. I mean, it's like it's interesting because you were saying, I think you were saying this privately the other day, Ronnie, that you never enjoyed sabbing, but of course the idea of enjoying sabbing is a bit of an odd one anyway in my book. But I
think there are some sabs that kind of do enjoy sabbing. I mean, they don't enjoy that. Obviously, the hunter going after an animal, to kill that other animal. Of course, they don't enjoy that. But I think the whole, there is something about the whole thing of going, of getting out there and sabbing and that people kind of actually enjoy. But I never did. I went because I felt I kind of had to. I sort of forced myself to go. Yeah, and I think as soon as I found another way, another way of doing things, I kind of switched to that, really.
Yeah, that's very similar to me. And also, as I learned more and more about animal use, I realized that I was, driving past farms and vivisection laboratories to get to a hunt, with the kind of off chance of saving a fox, because let's face it, sometimes they go out and they just don't kill a fox anyway. And so I was thinking that, well, in terms of time, effort, and money and everything, am I putting my efforts into the kind of best place, as it were? So there was that in the end for me. Going back to this thing about people wanting to get their life back, like an old mate.
Well, you see, what kind of life do you want? Surely the most important way to live is to kind of have a meaningful life, where you actually do something meaningful with your life. And what can be more meaningful than campaigning to end the greatest form of oppression that's ever existed in the world?
But if it's too painful to do, I mean, I know that nobody want. I mean, we're not trying to give people reasons to quit, but for some people, depending on their personality and all that, well, they really do have, perhaps, or at least to rethink, and which I think you'd also say, well, try and kind of step down a peg or two, but still doing stuff, right? That kind of thing. But I mean, maybe, see, I never bought, when my mate said essentially, I want my life back, I never bought that, really, because I thought, well,
what sort of life, what sort of life do you want? Do you want a life where you kind of just live and die and, don't really achieve anything, don't really make a difference? Or do you want a life where you kind of have made a difference and have improved the world and have moved things in the right direction? I know what sort of life I'd want. Because at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. You have to kind of, the person you have to reckon with is like yourself, as to whether, you feel that, you have lived a meaningful life.
I don't think people who drop out do it lightly either, though. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I mean, so I think we have to acknowledge the fact that for them it's a very painful thing, and like you say, they then kind of have to live with it. And I think that's why some people will kind of dip their toe back in every now and again to kind of keep some continuity, or maybe switch it to kind of financial support and everything. Because we were talking about this issue of what happens in general. I mean, it happened to me, it probably happened to you, and I know lots of people who it happened to, where their initial enthusiasm was just clobbered around the head with the realization that we're not going to do this as quick as I thought we were. And now what? It's a kind of now what then, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we all, I think we kind of all go through that, really. I think when you first learn about the enormity of, the oppression of other animals, then you kind of, I felt I've got to throw myself into this. I've got to kind of do as much as I can. And really at kind of whatever cost to myself. And I think probably at the beginning I kind of did perhaps expect that change would come more quickly than is actually the case. But I think that kind of, once I realized that change wasn't going to come as quickly as I kind of perhaps imagined, that didn't make me give up. That didn't make me give up. I kind of felt, well, all right, it's not going to come as quick as I thought it might. But if it's ever going to come at all, I've got to keep going.
Yeah, I think it must be true for both of us. I would think. Let's see if you agree with this. That when you looked around when we first got involved, there was things like groups, kind of doing little demos, but mainly kind of setting up and running petitions and that kind of stuff. And then there was the SABs, and then there was the ALF. And so then you were thinking, well, I've accepted it's going to be a long haul, but which of those do you do? Because you almost like think, well, the petition thing is even longer. And so I think that's probably why we got involved with direct action. Would you say that's right?
Yes, I think that's true. I think it was because, or one of the main reasons was because we looked at what had happened previously. because with the direct action, it wasn't, the direct action was in a sense, concerned with single issues. It wasn't, we weren't involved in a vegan education campaign. The direct, the ALF was mainly focused on animal experiments and the fur trade, to be quite honest, and to a certain extent on hunting, very much more than anything else. And we kind of knew with all those issues that decades of kind of much more conventional campaigning hadn't achieved anything. So we thought, well, yeah, if we can do something that's more hard hitting, then maybe that will make a difference.
Now I just put this one back up from Jennifer because I mean, I think you'll agree this is true, but also it's not enough.
Yes, I mean, obviously that is true, and I think like in the because I looked at the latest figures for the UK for there's a thing called animal kill counter, that they estimate the number of animals that are killed for the food industry, and there's one for the UK. And I did some calculations based on the latest figures from there, and it turned out that for every person who consumes animal products in the UK, it's just under 100 animals are killed every year. It seems to have gone down a bit. It was over 100 at one time, but nevertheless, it's like a huge figure. So, anyone that kind of goes vegan and just by not consuming animal products any longer, they're sparing almost 100 animals a year.
Well, there is a counter argument to that, isn't there, Ronnie? Which is that you're not, because the government will just, as it were, warehouse them, as it were.
Well, yes, but I think the thing is there's limited capacity for that, and that's not something that they could keep on doing. And people also talk about subsidies from my sort of study of the subsidies. What subsidies do is actually they artificially decrease the price of animal products. So it kind of, if you're trying to persuade someone to consume the sort of vegan equivalent of an animal product, then that's going to very often be more expensive. So that can deter people. Just the economics of it it kind of makes it harder to educate people, persuade people to adopt a vegan diet. But if you do succeed in persuading people to adopt a vegan diet, then that does have an effect. It just makes it harder to educate people. It doesn't mean that educating people doesn't work.
Okay. Paul's saying managed to do a bit of door dropping even with these issues. So well done for that, because
yes, I mean, brilliant to anyone that overcomes difficulties, and strangely enough, a lot of people that are involved in activism are people that have overcome various difficulties, either mental or physical or both, and it's quite often the totally able-bodied people who don't do anything, very oddly. And obviously that's a great shame, because the more vegans that become involved in activism, the more people we educate, and the quicker we can kind of achieve animal liberation. That's important. What Deb says is important. I mean, the campaign against the slave trade, here in the UK, took 80 years. It took 80 years until the slave trade was abolished. Doesn't mean slavery was abolished, but the actual trade in slaves by the UK was abolished. Took 80 years.
Yeah, but Ronnie and Deb, it means that in that 80 years, it wasn't the same people, just like it isn't with our movement, that people come and go. And in all movement,
I'm sure that's right, but it does show that these things do take a long time, and we have to be in for the long haul, and even more so with speciesism. It's much more even, we're dealing with something that's even more entrenched within society than the slave trade was.
Well, yeah, the thing is, you say you're in for the long haul, and I think some people are willing to pay whatever price it is to be there for the long haul. A lot of people clearly aren't, but there's no reason they still play a role. And maybe what it is then is for their involvement for however long, is part of the campaign and needs to be kind of managed in a way.
I think that's kind of, if we're kind of looking at the situation where, the very simple situation where somebody thinks, we're never going to achieve animal liberation in the sense of totally changing the world, so other animals are no longer oppressed anywhere by humans. That concept of animal liberation. I think there are people that reach a stage where they they doubt that is ever going to be achieved, because they see that progress is so slow, and so they kind of give up on doing stuff that will lead to that. They either totally give up advocating for animals altogether, or they switch to a different form of kind of helping other animals that doesn't fundamentally challenge speciesism and doesn't kind of go towards creating
So
fundamental
you're thinking
change.
about rescue and sanctuaries.
I'm thinking about rescue and welfare campaigning. In other words, I think you get people saying, we're never going to achieve animal liberation, so the best I can do is just snatch a few animals from the fire, just save whom I can. There's that attitude, and then there's other people that may think, well, we're never gonna totally free other animals, so the best I can do is try and improve their conditions under oppression, and that would be welfarism. And so both those approaches are because people no longer believe that we can actually.
Yeah, actually, there's a guy on our TikTok yesterday saying exactly that. You're not going to get a vegan will, so therefore you should do ... right?
Yes,
telling us how to do it. But
what I would say to that is like, it's right. What do we need to do to achieve? I would say like probably a vegan run society. I don't think we necessarily have to educate everybody to go vegan to achieve animal liberation. We just have to be the ones in charge, basically, and that still means changing a hell of a lot of people, in order to achieve that. But it's doesn't mean changing everyone. And basically, in order to do that, what we need is vegan education. We need to educate more people to become vegan. And that's not just because of the effect of those people, as consumers or non-consumers. Those people aren't buying into, aren't supporting the various forms of animal, the oppression of other animals, particularly by the food industry. So and that's the first part. And the other way in which people are changed, or hopefully change, is like more in a political sense, that as I said many times before, the more vegans we create, the more vegan politicians we'll have, and the more vegans we'll have to vote for them. So eventually, it can be vegans that take over, right?
Well, that's certainly the long haul, anyway.
So that's the long haul, and that's the reason for doing vegan education, and that's how vegan education can lead to widespread and bring about widespread animal liberation. And in fact, that's absolutely fundamental to the achievement of animal liberation. If we don't have sufficient vegan outreach, and we don't have sufficient vegans doing that outreach, and it doesn't happen frequently enough, and it doesn't happen in enough places, then we're not going to achieve animal liberation. I mean, that it's crucial that we have this widespread outreach, right? So that's important in that big way. But even if that fails, even if doesn't succeed, and we don't succeed in educating sufficient people to become vegan in order to achieve widespread animal liberation. If we consider that for every person we educate to become vegan, that's equivalent to sparing, certainly in the UK, in some other countries like the USA it would be greater. In other some other countries might be a bit less, but in the UK it's just under 100 animals a year consumed on average by everyone that consumes animal products. Right, you're by educating somebody to become vegan, you're preventing that. And where else? What other form of action can I take for other animals that will spare almost 100 of them a year? I won't do that by doing rescue, will I? I won't do that by demonstrating outside fur shops. I won't do that by demonstrating outside a vivisection laboratory, will I? But I can do that through vegan outreach. Like if I just, through a whole year of vegan outreach, if I educate just one person to become vegan, or at least just to adopt a vegan diet, then I've spared almost 100 animals a year.
Yeah,
so
well,
it's still worth it.
Disagree with you there, and it goes back to, I tend to look back at my sabbing days and think, wow, years of not doing the most useful thing,
So it's still worth doing. It's still worth doing because it's win-win. It's win-win. Yeah, this is the only way we're going to achieve, or let's say this it's crucial to the achievement of animal liberation. It's crucial to the achievement of animal liberation. Right. But at the same time, it's also, sparing in the short term a huge number of other animals. So it's something you everyone needs to go for anyway, because
it's a win-win, says Ronnie Lee. Now
it's a win.
We're going to have to move on because we've got a couple of other issues. But this one is interesting. Before we do that, which is that I think this is part of the entire thing that we talked about, is a sense that when you think, well, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, say, I think for that, some people just find that unacceptable almost, and turn to something that they think they can achieve in their lifetime, like, for example, I don't know, closing down the fur farms, or so it shut in a greyhound racing stadium. So they've got to scale it down because they kind of can't really deal with the fact that you're not going to see it yourself, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can kind of understand that, but the thing is, if you're, like if you're educate another person to become vegan, that number of animals that are thereby spared year in, year out is going to happen in your lifetime. That's going to happen really, quite quickly, isn't it? So you are achieving that. It's just that it's not so tangible. Like if you're involved in a campaign, where you succeed in closing a place down, then that's a tangible thing. You can kind of see the result of your efforts. With vegan outreach, it's not so easy to see. I mean,
we've spoken in several of our shows about the social psychology of that. Some people really do need those so-called victories, right? Because without them, they just kind of you get worn away. And so this is part of the story, isn't it? That they need to switch to the stuff that has got a more tangible outcome that they can see and feel and taste, as it were, instead of veganism, which is kind of out of focus.
Well, I think it's the kind of I think it may be that one of the factors may be that people simply kind of don't analyze things enough and don't think about think about their actions sufficiently, because obviously by analyzing it, in terms of number of animals spared by what actions you take, then obviously educating other people to become vegan, I think it's pretty obvious that spares the greatest number of animals from oppression and slaughter.
I'd agree with that. I mean, we know there is a counter argument, but I agree with your counter
Yes,
to the
yes,
counter
yeah.
argument.
And far more than any other action that anyone could take. And I think it's yeah. I mean, I think the problem is, we're involved in a struggle between kind of, like rational analysis on one side and kind of emotionalism on the other side. In that, there's a big emotional content, isn't there, to kind of going and rescuing an animal and maybe kind of saving an animal from death row and taking that animal to sanctuary or adopting that animal. That's a very tangible thing. That's kind of right in front of you. Whereas educating somebody to go vegan and the far greater number of animals spared through that isn't so tangible. It's kind of more at a distance, isn't it? And so it doesn't have the same emotional content. And I think it's an area where, in a sense, our emotions are getting in the way of achieving animal liberation, because we're tending, people in the overall animal advocacy movement are tending to go with their emotions.
Well, we're not robots either, though, are we, Ronnie?
Sorry?
So we're not robots either. So
we're not robots either. No, but I think, and it's not, and I think emotion's important. I think emotion's important as a driving force and as a fuel. I mean, if I didn't feel angry about, how humans, behave towards other animals, then I wouldn't be involved in this. And obviously, so emotion is involved, but as a fuel rather than something that actually controls what I do.
Yeah,
I think that's the difference.
Okay, well, we're still struggling to move on to those other issues, but
what
about the numbers here? Do you think, Ronnie?
I think it's hard to tell, because I think it depends on opinion polls, and they can vary greatly.
It also depends on where we talk. I mean, is this global? Is this
and I think also that you've kind of got that. At first, the growth was very slow. It's not been like a linear growth, has it? It's been first that the increase in veganism was very slow, and then it's kind of accelerated in more recent years.
Goes back to because I know Francione got involved with this a few years ago, but this idea about if you educate one other person to become vegan, if everybody did that, it wouldn't actually take very long. But that process isn't happening. Then you've got the kind of dropout thing that we're talking about. Then you've got the problem, which is a bit more difficult, I think, which is that you've got the differentiation between people on a plant-based diet and vegans as well, and then the fact that a lot of people on the plant-based diet just stop doing it and go back to products derived from other animals, that kind of thing, whereas the ethical vegans don't. So I don't think it would be right to claim that we would create 1 million ethical vegans a year.
I mean, possibly not, but I think the bottom line is that, if a lot more vegans were involved in outreach, we'd create a hell of a lot more of the population would become vegan.
Depends who they are, but let's move on.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, obviously, there are, not everyone who advocates for veganism does it in the best way, do they? But I think one problem is that, with the word activism, when a lot of people hear the word activism, they associate with that with kind of like militancy, with shouting, demonstrating, with kind of, high emotions and all that kind of thing. When it needn't be like that at all. I mean, activism can be very quiet, very peaceful, and very sort of unobtrusive in a sense. Like I kind of mentioned just earlier about door dropping and delivering leaflets to people's homes, leaving them in public
language
places.
Here is interesting, isn't it? Plant foodist, is that what we would call plant based? Do you think? Or
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm determined to move it on. I wanted to talk to you about this thing about. I think this is very difficult from a movement point of view. And in our movement in particular, the first general thing to say about it is that sociologists realize that the animal movement recruit through moral shocks and not networking as such. And so therefore you see all the time, oh, watch this film, watch that, and they're trying to morally shock people to make changes and stuff. So that means that they're putting people in front of graphic imagery, and also that means they're putting themselves and other already vegans in front of that graphic imagery. And then another aspect of it, Ronnie, which I think is more subtle but is real, is even when we talk about animal use, I think some people can then start to get really tired of that, because it's just, it nags at them, and it just makes them feel shit, you know.
Yes, yeah. But I think it's possible to, it's easily possible to do outreach without any of those things. I mean, the outreach I do doesn't involve any of those things. I don't.
But we don't even do in-reach without them. I mean, we were saying a couple of weeks ago on a show, I think, that there was a video made by a vegan for other vegans. It was aimed at other vegans. We did a watch along to it, and there was incredibly graphic footage part of it.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, why would you do that to other vegans? They're already vegan.
The graphic footage wasn't necessary to what the video was trying to say. It was totally unnecessary. It needn't have been in there.
Yeah, okay, but and then you've got the more subtle stuff, which is that if we accept the moral shock idea, that we do get a lot of recruits by showing them videos, which means therefore there's got to be some element of at least showing animal use, which a lot of people find graphic. A lot of people can't really cope with seeing it, and there are some stuff which is a lot harder to watch than others. So we're kind of recruiting that way, and also kind of damaging the movement that way too.
I think it's a case of and I think what tends to happen is that some vegans, perhaps particularly newer vegans, may think that's what outreach is. That's the only way of doing outreach. That's all they know. All they know is like people, showing stuff on computer screens, and that's what outreach is. And so it's either that or nothing. In other words, if they reach a stage where they can't stand to do that because they can't stand to be constantly subjected to those images,
but you still got pictures on your leaflets that you're door dropping out, haven't you?
No. We don't use graphic images on leaflets. For the main reason that someone's child might pick the leaflet up, and I don't think it's necessary. We don't. I would never drop a door drop a leaflet with a graphic image on, and I don't think it's necessary to do so.
So are there some leaflets that you've had to reject because of that then?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Oh,
right,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I always check if I'm ordering leaflets from anyone to door drop, then I'll always check first, because you generally get to see what they look like, and I would never order any with graphic images on. So I don't think it's necessary to have graphic images on them. And as I say, if you're putting them through people's doors, then I would always worry that their child might pick.
Yeah, well, going to the talking about it, I'm not going to give any details, but if you remember back in the 80s, the leaflets were incredibly graphic. This is vivisection ones and stuff, right?
Yes, yeah.
And I suppose you don't really get the same as that now. I don't suppose, but even so, you still get activists standing in slaughterhouses and all that kind of stuff.
You do, and it's more. It's kind of. I mean, yes. I mean, people have become vegan through viewing those images, through viewing those videos. We know that. But if we're talking about the effect on the activists that are kind of showing those videos, and the worry that some of them may drop out because that just gets too much for them, or not do outreach at all in the first place because they think that's what they're going to have to do.
Yeah.
Then it's really important for vegans to realize that is not the only way of doing outreach. That it's possible to do outreach very effectively without showing graphic images, without yourself being exposed to graphic images.
I think you might be onto something, you know, Ronnie, because I bet if we did a poll of vegans and say what is outreach, then that's what would come up, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think a lot of modern vegans think outreach is Cuba truth. But they think it involves computer stuff on screens. You know, there's various groups that do stuff on screens, don't they? Like there's We the Free, Earthlings Experience did as well, didn't they? That was a video thing. You know, this is a sort of modern form of outreach because, you know, this is the modern technology. Back in the day, we didn't have anything more than leaflets and placards, did we? You know, we didn't have computers and screens, and so we had to, you know,
we did it in the 80s in Liverpool because we had a converted kind of you know, catering van, and we used to go and hire a you know, a generator and put it behind it with all these baffles on it to try and keep it quiet, and that would be the wires around then to the, you know, VHS player and just a normal telly, you know. So,
oh yes, yeah, the days of VHS, yes, but that would have been very rare. I mean, that's because it kind of took so much kind of setting up to you know, when you were kind of using that back in the day. But it's easily possible to do outreach without subjecting yourself to that type of thing. You know, if you're someone that can't face that sort of thing in the first place, or if you're someone that's, you know, you've been doing it so long that it started to wear you down, then just come away and do a different form of outreach. You know, just do door dropping and or do information stores where you've got materials that aren't graphic.
But it's not as though those groups you're talking about are going to tell people there's a different form of outreach. So that's part of, you know, I mean, they're not going to say, well, this is what we do. But if you're not comfortable with that, then go here. They're not going to do that, I don't suppose, are they? Or unless they do, I don't know, do they?
I probably don't know enough about them to know that what else they kind of encourage people to. I know, for instance, like Anonymous for the Voiceless have their own particular form of outreach, and they recruit, you know, people into their organization, and they got various chapters, which how long is that word being used? We never used to use that word back in the day. Chapters, did we? Groups, it was. It must be an American thing. Is it chapters?
Yeah, Peter used to say they got chapters. It's a North American thing, yeah.
It sounds a bit religious to me. I don't know whether it came from a religious, you know, origin. That anyway.
Chapter 10, line 4.
But you know, they're local groups, aren't they? Really, that's what we'd have called them. And you know, and it's all about, you know, doing things a certain way according to their, you know, the methodology that they worked out, and it kind of doesn't include anything else. I'm not saying they're opposed to people doing anything else. It's just not part of what they do.
I think sometimes, you know, looking back, I don't want to be a boring old fart about this, but when you got that system that we talked about, which is that there used to be local groups, and they were made up of these contacts of all the different various groups, and so you get the BOAV contact and the animal aid contact, and you get the NAVS contact, and they would form the core. So that meant that within that one group, you had lots of different methodologies, and people could pick and choose. Then it's not a question of being trying to push it into
yes,
one thing.
That's right. But I think the whole thing of the, you know, the most graphic of all images is that which is kind of on a video, isn't it? I mean, you know, we can see, you know, some really horrific still photographs, but videos take it to
I don't know about that. I was thinking about that earlier, thinking about the show, and I was thinking about, do you remember Slaughter the Innocent? I've got it over there by Hans Royce, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you read that, it's like a goddamn horror story. You know, I mean, like,
yeah.
We often say, don't we, around Halloween, if you want to see a horror story, go watch Earthlings. But I mean, if you wanted to read a book which is a horror story, then the anti-vivisection books are absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I suppose your mind creates the video, doesn't it? In that case. Yeah, I think that's, I think you're probably right. But that's not, but although I think, you know, that type of thing has changed people, for the activists themselves, if people aren't able to cope with using that type of thing because of the effect on themselves, they don't have to. There are effective forms of activism, effective forms of outreach where you don't need to use graphic imagery, and you don't need to subject yourself to it if you're not able or no longer able to do that. So it's not a question of giving up, it's just a question of switching to a different form of outreach. And I think also, in a kind of perhaps
but if it doesn't exist, you've got a problem.
If a different form of outreach didn't exist, you would have a problem, but it does exist, and it's existed for
but I mean, apart from you, Ronnie, I mean, let's be real here. Apart from you, and the shows that you're on, and the people that you associate, who talks about door dropping? You don't see any of the influencers.
It's not. There are some people.
Have you ever seen Joey Carlstrong talk about door dropping?
No, it's not. It's not a very widely talked about thing. But national groups do encourage it. I mean, Viva encourages people to door drop, and they'll send leaflets free to people to door drop, for instance.
But I think there's a big contingent of modern day activists who don't do much with the Vivas and the animal aids and all that. They go to the influencers, and the influencers don't tell them to do that type of thing, or even tell them it exists, give them that option. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really watch the influencers hardly at all, so I really can't comment on what they say or what they don't say. My concern, in terms of the influencers, would be that people watch the influencers instead of doing their own action. In other words, that somehow they think by kind of
that's almost like the deal, though, Ron. We were talking about. I was saying, wasn't I, a couple of shows ago, that I used to hate those leaflets which say, help us to help them. I used to hate those leaflets, right? But this is the modern day video version of it. You sign up to my Patreon, and that'll keep me doing this, right?
Yeah, and I think the danger is whether or not they say that. That's how people will regard it.
Well, they say it every time. They say it every time they go on screen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because this is the thing. Like support me, and I'll bring about animal liberation. All you got to do is support me, and obviously that's not. It can't be brought about that way. All those people that are kind of watching those things, they need to get out and they need to become active. They need to spread the vegan message in whatever way they feel comfortable with. That's what needs to be encouraged.
We've always had a movement, which is whether they've been embedded into the national groups, and now with the influence entrepreneurs and everything, that have been a little bit like that, rather than kind of encouraging the kind of mass activism that you talk about. They're almost like more talking about, it's to do with where you put your money and which Patreon account and which, where have you subscribed to and this kind of stuff, right?
Yes, yeah, and it's still a big. I mean, there are some signs, here in England with a couple of national groups like Viva and the Vegan Society, where they are setting up initiatives to encourage people to do things in their local area, and that's really for both of them. That's kind of quite a recent thing.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ronnie, for the good of the movement, I'd be very interested to see how much publicity those initiatives get from the influencers. And I imagine it's going to be very, very little, if any.
I suppose
that's the problem. We're not kind of spreading people around. Well, if you don't want to do this, then there's this, and giving people options, which is always a good thing.
Yes, and I think, I mean, what I'd like to see the influencers do, and whether or not, to what extent they're doing it already, I don't know, is to encourage people to take their own action, is to encourage people to become active in promoting veganism in their own areas.
Normally what it is, the stuff that I've seen at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, people, is that they talk about full-time activism. So that's the model. Okay, you can be a full-time activist like me, but it doesn't talk about the everyday low-scale kind of door dropping and all that kind of stuff, libraries and all that. You never see him talking about that. It's more like you've got to be some kind of product. This full-time activism idea, which basically means I need funding.
Yes, and I think and that's a huge problem if all people are encouraged to do is just give money to someone else like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think about Declan Bowens. He started off 11 years ago now, just on his own in Dublin, and there's not been many weeks in the last years, apart from the obvious, where we missed it any week, and for many years we were doing three times a week and stuff. That, but it didn't need a massive Patreon account. It didn't need this kind of full-time activism type idea. This was people who were just using their initiative, getting together, kind of like scrounging a photocopy and this kind of stuff. And so it's much more DIY. And I think the DIY culture thing, which was much more anarchic, and that's how I got involved with the movement. And you're thinking about the resource centers, where you went to the letter set and all that kind of DIY type thing. Yeah. That's gone now. It seems to me, anyway.
I think, very much. I mean, I think there are still some groups. I mean, we're very, very DIY locally, with our stall and all that. That's all kind of, we've made that all ourselves, and there are one or two other groups that are the same, and mostly where they're kind of run by older people that kind of are probably from the old days. But I mean, I've no doubt that there are people who've become vegan because of the influencers, but it's a question of like, Oh
no, I'm not claiming that's not the case at all. No, that's not what I'm on about. It's more to do with the fact that we've got a there's a full social movement to think of with a vast array of different ideas, and how we kind of talk about that amongst ourselves as kind of fellow advocates.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Because I mean, almost all vegans can, be involved in outreach in various ways, and all vegans should be encouraged and helped to do that. And the other thing is that most vegans can't be full-time activists. They have work, they have families, they have other other responsibilities in their lives. So the type of outreach, the only type of outreach they can do is that which can be fitted into their life. So it's got to be something simple. It's got to be something.
Yeah, but you see, that's the selling point of full-time activism. Is kind of like, well, you can't do this, but I can if you pay me. That's and I'm not necessarily knocking that. It's just that it's not a question of in the meantime you can do X, Y, and Z as well. That bit seems to be kind of lacking, I think.
I think maybe that's lacking, and it would be good. What I'd like to see is, is maybe the influencers do more in terms of encouraging people to become active locally in promoting veganism, even if that's only in very simple ways. And the same with national organisations, although some have already kind of started doing that. This needs to be like a kind of wholesale effort, doesn't it? Really, to get the message out.
I'm going to invite you to make your final statement. I've got an idea what it might be, but what I want you to do is do it in this context of kind of in terms of what we talked about. This idea about dropping out. I want my life back, and it's too long, it's too much, and all that. In relation to that, from the social movement that we're in, what can we do about it? Do you think, Ronnie?
Well, I think we can. We can explain to people that there are other forms of outreach that aren't so taxing for people that find kind, the sort of predominant forms of outreach we have now, where people find that, too taxing for them in one way or another. There are other forms of outreach that won't be so taxing. There are other forms of outreach that can probably be more easily fitted into their life. And so it's not a question of like kind of not having your life. You can still have your life. What you're talking about is what you're basically talking about is like spare time. How do I use my spare time once I've done all the things that I kind of absolutely have to do in my life, to do with my work, to my family, to maybe my rescued animals, whatever that they have to kind of make sure.
Don't give us any details about your toilet arrangements, Ronnie.
Yeah, no, I won't bring you into that. Not this show, anyway.
Yeah, no.
Everyone's got some spare time. It's a question of how can I use my spare time? How can you use some of my spare time to promote veganism? And so you kind of don't have to give up your life. You don't have to give up your life. What you're doing is fitting that vegan outreach into your life. No, it's not like, so the idea, I want my life back. Well, you've already got your life, and plus you can have a component to your life which actually enriches your life because you're doing something that's like so fundamentally important as part of your life. That's the way. That's the way to look at it. That's the way to look at it, and that's the way people need to be kind of encouraged to look at it. And all we can do is just keep saying it, really, and showing people that there are lots of different ways of spreading the vegan message, and which are probably more gentle on the person doing them.
Right. Well, I think we've covered the issue fairly well. I just realised I didn't play the opening credits, but never mind.
Yeah. I think there's a they're kind of, sometimes there's a problem where people are involved in a certain type of activism, and for some reason they can no longer do that type of activism. They seem to have difficulty in transitioning to something else. I know like quite a lot of ex-ALF activists that don't really do anything anymore because they can no longer do ALF stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. If I can't do what I've always done, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah, because I think they feel I can never reach those heights. I remember Nancy Phipps, because you remember Nancy Phipps.
Of course, yeah.
Who was she was very, a very well-known activist in sort of West Midlands area of England, wasn't she? Coventry.
I did one of my MA focus groups at her place.
Yes, and of course her daughter Jill was tragically killed by a lorry while campaigning against the export of calves from Baggington Airport, wasn't near Coventry. They're flying calves out, like export calves for the veal trade. And I remember going to Nancy's funeral, which was one of the kind of most saddest things, because it was almost a funeral that was staged by very tired movements, where it was just like your ordinary funeral, where I think there was some religious person doing the funeral, and basically they just said, well, Nancy was well known as an animal lover, and that was it. There was nothing said about.
Jill's funeral was a grand affair, wasn't it?
Jill's funeral was at Coventry Cathedral. It was attended by loads of dignitaries, and it was massive event. But Nancy's was very much a kind of huge anticlimax, because I think it was just that there was no one that really wanted to take it on. I think, talking about, like that whole movement she'd been involved in with the ALF, and, I think she was involved with the Animal Liberation Leagues as well, had kind of gone into decline. And, at the funeral, there were lots of like ex-ALF activists at her funeral, obviously. And I went around talking to them and saying, what are you doing now? And hardly any of them were doing anything in terms of animal advocacy. There's one or two involved in a little bit of rescue.
Were they still vegan?
Oh, it's still big. I mean, obviously, the exception is probably John Curtin, and John Curtin has always been an activist in various ways. But the other people that came, many of them I hadn't seen for years, and they said, "Oh no, I don't."
John was doing meditate to liberate them, wasn't he?
Oh,
But
John's done everything, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But and they it was like because they were no longer able to do ALF stuff, they kind of, well, I don't do anything. And I thought, well, look, that what a tragedy that is, that they're not able to kind of, become involved in vegan outreach, for instance. To me, that would be the the main thing I'd like to see them doing, of course. And I think there's kind of a lot of I think there's a lot of ex-ALF activists in that category. That it's like that someone was, like someone's in the army and then they get demobbed from the army and then they just live an ordinary life. It's a bit like that. You know what I mean? They couldn't.
What about? You see, the point is, I mean, I often think back about, my football days and the amount of people that had come and gone. But it's the same with the activists. You can think of, we could probably make a massive list of people that we knew about, worked with, and all the rest of it. And now you've not heard about them forever.
I think just because you haven't heard about someone doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing anything. But certainly this group of people who were all like, they were like really prominent activists. I mean, Nancy was involved with some very, very active people. And hardly any of them were doing anything.
And so they were that was dropout, not burnout, was it? Or was it, what do you think?
Well, kind of, because I've been involved in this like really, really exciting campaign. And hard-hitting campaign. And now I can no longer be involved in it because I can't, maybe can't risk the legal consequences. That's probably the main reason. I'm not going to do anything because nothing can ever compare to that. So I'm just not going to do anything.
Yeah, well, it ain't about you though, mate. So
well, I think kind of this is another thing that's and another reason for dropout. I know we're kind of probably going on a bit longer, but it's that people, and we've had a thing in our local group where people like they've stopped doing things because maybe they've like had a disagreement with another person in the group, and they say, well, if that other person's still allowed to be in the group, I'm not going to be in the group and I'm not going to do anything. You get that kind of attitude where people stop doing things for these kind of like really personal reasons, and you're thinking, yeah, but that's not. So basically, what's happening is for someone's personal reason, the other animals are losing out when it's nothing to do with them. In other words, I'm no longer going to deliver leaflets because someone else in the group has done something that's upset me. When I don't have to work with that person, I don't have to even do anything.
Well, I mean, actually, funny enough, I was thinking of raising this issue, and then I've decided not to, because I think that is very difficult for a social movement to navigate, because there are some people who, and we are all people, so we're social animals, but we'll disagree on things. We'll disagree on politics and all this kind of stuff. And so the calls for, well, just do it for the animals kind of thing, we all know that doesn't work. And so there are quite a lot of people that I know that have dropped out of this movement because of others in it. And that's a very difficult thing when you've got that kind of situation, right? Because how can you do with that? It's almost like, well, if that person is seen as the representative of a movement, I don't want anything to do with it, thanks, kind of thing. And so I know several people who would be in that category with prominent people in the movement that they do not want to associate with because of the values that they have, which they find objectionable. Now, you could say, well, the only people who are going to suffer there ultimately are going to be the other animals, right? And yet we're dealing with the human beings here, and that's why it becomes a very difficult movement.
And it's kind of and I mean I find it difficult because I mean if there's someone that I'm not keen on, that I where perhaps I find things I say objectionable or somebody I can't get on with, if that is the case, then I just don't do stuff with them.
I'm thinking about this a little bit deeper than that. It's people in the movement who are trying to change the movement, who are trying to, say, for example, water the movement down or make it something other. Now, the thing is, it's very difficult then just to go, oh, well, that's them, and that's what they do, and this is me. It's difficult that if you see that they actually represent a threat to the values of the movement that you joined, it becomes a little bit more difficult then, isn't it? Because you don't want to kind of do that. And I've always said this for years, that the idea of movement unity is very attractive, but it's so difficult to bring about. Because we're dealing with people.
But I think this is really a case of where people no longer want to be involved because of quite minor personal disputes. It's not something like racism or sexism or anything like that.
No, fair enough. I mean, if it's so you've got this scaling kind of spectrum then, haven't you, of things that you can say, well, let's put that in the kind of trivial bracket, whereas there's other things that are not. And so but that's all subjective too, right?
Or you get fairly, it seems to be that it kind of often doesn't take very much to stop someone becoming active, and it makes me wonder kind of what it is really.
You mean stops them being active or stops them becoming active?
They stop being active. Someone is active, and then they they stop being active, and the reason they've stopped seems to be fairly trivial compared with everything
that does raise a really worrying possibility. It seems to me. Maybe there are some people who are very uncomfortable about their activism. They would rather not be doing it, and so they're looking for something to kind of like be the reason. I mean that could be. I mean, it's just speculation, but I mean that just goes to show how kind of difficult these human issues are within a social movement setting, because you got to work together, but you're all humans as well.
Yes, I think that's I mean, it obviously is to do with that, but there's all these obviously there's all these different reasons why people cease being active, and it'd be really important if we could find a way of doing something about that. But I think the difficulty is because the reasons are so various, aren't they, with it?
There's no kind of one thing fits all. No. This is interesting from BC here. Interested to know how many people go vegan because of vegan activism versus self-discovery / education. I think it's probably a mixture. I would think of that. But obviously the latter could be the case exclusively, and the former could be the case exclusively, or it could be a mix, right? So
well I think the activism leads to the education, doesn't it? I mean, the reason you're active is to plant a seed, is to kind of give people information, and then
but that's not self-discovery then. It's kind of directed discovery, isn't it then?
Well, I think if you're talking about self-discovery, I mean, depends how that's defined. I mean, that would need the person to be exposed to something. I mean, I went vegan because of an article I read in a magazine. So would that be self-discovery, or would it be that article was a form of activism by the person who wrote it that caused me to go?
That's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah. Because that was activism. I mean, getting a letter published in your local paper is a form of activism. Getting an article in a magazine is a form of
and if you're prompted to do something, even by anything, then the idea of it being self-discovery is questionable, then, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and I don't think really. I'm not sure how self-discovery. Yeah, it could be that there are people that kind of work it out for themselves, I suppose, but I would imagine that would be very rare.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Reagan talked about all the different type of people, the kind of Damascus and all that, and he was saying that most people are muddlers, but there are some people who he just kind of hits them, and then there's just some people who are just born that way, the Da Vincians, this kind of stuff. I'm not quite sure if I'm getting all these right, but there's Da Vincians, Damascus, and muddlers, and one group of that is they just almost like are born that way. Others, there's a kind of major kind of revelation given to them somehow, and then the majority, he thought, just muddled along until you eventually got there.
Yeah, I think there's some people that kind of don't take very much to cause them to change, whereas other people need a hell of a lot more. It's a much longer process with some other people. Whether that's the same.
I think the ones who kind of change quickly are very rare, and in fact, it's really interesting from a sociology point of view. Is the fact that I checked out this thing about you get those polls. What made you go vegan? And if you go and speak to the people privately about what they said made them go vegan, it wasn't that, but that was part of it. But it wasn't that. And whether it's a speech by somebody or whether it's a particular video, it's very rare for them to kind of almost like come in from the cold, almost see one thing and then bang, they're there. It tends not to work like that, because you need what you were just saying. You need a kind of to process it and let it sink in, and some bits become more kind of substantial in your mind or whatever. So it's a process. I call it a jigsaw. You start putting the pieces together, and then eventually, Reagan had this brilliant thing where he said that we kind of muddle along, and then one day you look in the mirror and there's a vegan animal rights person looking back at you, but you don't know when that's going to happen. Whereas the people you're talking about, but I think they're a very small amount, are the ones who just, it kind of clicks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know with myself that as soon as I found out about what was happening to the other animals, I immediately wanted to become vegan and do something about it.
Yeah, but then you've got the conversation with your sister's boyfriend.
Well, yeah, you see, if I hadn't become vegetarian, and that was through obviously my sister's first husband, who was vegetarian, then I then wouldn't have read the magazine that caused me to become vegan. So
yeah, so these are the these are the bits of the jigsaw. That's what I'm saying.
Jigsaw, yeah, absolutely, yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Right. Speaking of jigsaws, I don't know why I'm saying this, because it's got absolutely nothing to do with finishing. But speaking of jigsaws, we better go, Ronnie. Does that make any sense?
Yes, but what I'd say to people, if there's anyone watching this who feels that we're involved in a like hopeless struggle, that we're never going to achieve animal liberation, like none of us knows whether or not it can be achieved, but what we do know is that if we are going to achieve it, we've got to have a hell of a lot more vegan education.
Yeah.
And the other thing about vegan education is not just the long-term objective or the long-term possibility of achieving animal liberation, but the short-term sparing of such a large number of animals when we educate other people to become vegan. So I'd say yes, another, seem to be inundated with cats this evening. So I'd say to those people to keep at it, by being involved in vegan outreach. You are bound to be educating other people to become vegan.
I seem to remember. I remember this inside even, but I seem to remember I had this kind of optimistic little something on my shoulder, because the depressed me would be going, it's never going to happen, you know, we're not going to do it and all that. And this voice used to say, well, you know, you could be wrong. You know, how do you know? And I'd have to kind of go, well, yeah, that's true. So I better get back to it.
Well, we don't know, but we do know what we have to do if we are going to achieve it. And we also know that the thing we have to do, you know, does yield positive results in the short term, whether or not we achieve the long-term objective. So I'd say to people who have disheartened, you know, just keep at it, just keep going, because you are making a, you know, whether or not we achieve the long-term objective, you're still making a very, very positive difference, you know.
So that's our end message, people. General Ronnie Lee says, get on with it.
And the other thing is, if people are doing a form of outreach where they feel that they can't go on with it because of graphic imageries and stuff like that, to remember that there's other forms of outreach you can do which don't involve that and are going to be much easier on you. You know, it can be done in a very gentle, very easygoing type of way. So don't give up. Just switch the type of outreach that you're doing.
Yep, seems reasonable. Right, people, thank you so much for sticking with us. We are a bit over time, but it's not been too bad. We're coming up to about 90 minutes, which sometimes is not that bad for us, but we
that's short.
Yeah, no, we tend to aim for an hour, and it very rarely So we'll probably be back with our news show in a couple of weeks, I would think. Ronnie, is that right? Do you think?
Yes, fairly soon. We'll have a look and see what news items we've got, you know, coming up.
Yeah, we'll have to exchange things on the Twinternet if
yes.
But all this, of course, depends on one thing, that we are
still alive.